Welcome to We Interrupt This Broadcast. It's your monthly roundup of everything that's happening in the Australian screen industry. I'm Julie Eckersley.
And I'm Kirsty Stark. And between us, we've been involved in hundreds of hours of screen stories, myself as a crew member and producer.
And me as a commissioner, producer, and actress. We're here to bring the industry together, spark a conversation, and keep you up to date.
So make sure to subscribe and follow us at We Interrupt Podcast on Instagram to join our weekly conversation.
Let's get into it.
Hello, Julie.
Hi, Kirsty. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's episode 2 of We Interrupt This Broadcast, and we have got a lot of feedback from everyone.
It was so brilliant to get some feedback. My favourite bit of feedback was people saying, hey, why haven't we had a podcast like this before in the Australian screen industry? I love that. And that's really what we want to do here. We want to add so much value that it's really worth people's time. And we're going to make some changes moving forward as well, right?
We are. One of the things we realised is that we don't want this to be a one-way conversation. We want people to feed into it and for it to really be a pulse of what the industry is thinking. So once our episodes are released on the third Tuesday of every month, we're then going to wait 24 hours. And on Wednesday evenings on our Instagram at We Interrupt Podcast, we're going to start a conversation. We'll put some polls, some quizzes, some question boxes. So feed into what we have been talking about during the episode.
And also keep the emails coming, because one of the things that's been really great is people now starting to give us information going, hey, can you talk about this? And that's super helpful in terms of us really being able to collate that information and get it back to you.
Yes, please get in touch. It's weinterruptpod@gmail.com.
There's something else that we're going to do as well. We're going to make this a weekly podcast, but it's going to have 2 parts to it. So on the third Tuesday of every month, we'll do these overview episodes where we're giving you the roundup of the industry. But then every Tuesday other than that, we're going to do deep dive interviews.
Some of the feedback we got was that people want to hear more information or go into greater detail on some of the subjects we've mentioned. So a deep dive is an interview with either of us, with someone from the industry.
Yeah, so we really want to dig down with people who are innovating, who are using social media in new ways, using new technologies in new ways. One of the things I'm really excited about is some of the people that we're talking to who have new business models, who are looking at ways to take the new media platforms that we've got and really build out their business models to make them sustainable.
And on my side, I'm really interested in how people are shaping or structuring new production models and how individuals as freelancers are treating themselves as a business and going out and finding new ways of working that fit in with the rest of their lives.
Particularly for women and women with children, I think that work-life balance when you're around production becomes absolutely unsustainable. I'd love to hear you talk about that. So really excited for those interviews to be coming your way from next week.
Let's talk about some of the key events in the industry in the last month.
Well, let's start with the Oscars. Unfortunately, no Australian winners, but we had some really great nominations, didn't we?
We did. I was really disappointed to see Memoir of a Snail miss out in Best Animated Feature, and also would have loved to see Greg Fraser pick up his second gong for June.
Yeah. One of the other interesting things about the Oscars this year was that they were live streamed. We're going to see a whole lot more of live streaming. It didn't go without a technical hitch, but it was live streamed on Hulu, and then subsequently you can watch it all on Disney. There was some scandal also around films. What happened with Anora and crew?
So there was some information that came out after Anora won about initially when the film was set up, it was with the director and producers on union contracts, but the rest of the crew were not. So there was this discrepancy between above the line and below the line, essentially, as we'd call it in Australia. And it actually flipped to a union show from a non-union halfway through. So really interesting there to see whether it was the production team deliberately obscuring the budget in order to try and get away with non-union rates, or it was crew coming into the show willing to work as non-union, but then pushing it to a union show halfway through in order to essentially secure their healthcare rights.
Wow, that's pretty significant issues.
The other really interesting thing with Anora is that for a $6 million budget film, the distribution company Neon ended up spending $18 million on their Oscar marketing campaign.
Wow.
And that was seen as more of a grassroots kind of really interesting campaign that they'd run. So you look at that discrepancy, and there is a distinction between a production budget that is completed and then you go and sell your film to a distributor. So it's not like that $18 million could have otherwise gone into crew. It was deliberately targeted at giving the film the best chance of success. But I think that's interesting on a low budget project like that. If crew aren't getting paid full rates, is there any opportunity for them in the back end to then benefit if the film does go on and have that kind of success?
But then, not all back ends are equal, because often the key creatives producer had been working for, 2 years or more on that project. And so it's, how do you make a back end that accounts for that? And I think the other thing that comes up here is, what is the value of an Oscar, like financially, and how that's voted for?
Yeah, that has some issues as well. It's not pay to play here yet, but we don't want to go down that path where awards become a popularity contest. So that's the Oscars. And on an Australian level, AIDC, the International Documentary Conference, has just wrapped up.
The theme this year was future telling. Now, you and I weren't there, but we have had some spies on the ground. So we've got really interesting feedback. Obviously, people love that conference. It's a really important part of the calendar year, and to really make that space to talk about factual. But we did hear some feedback that, particularly given the title of future telling, that there wasn't really enough leaning into the future. The people wanted more discussion about what happens next, where are we going.
That landscape of documentary and factual storytelling is obviously shifting so quickly, especially because you really want to be in the moment following a story, not necessarily always watching a heavily polished wrap up 6 months or a year down the track. So we do have incredible, successful feature documentaries still making big money at the box office here in Australia. But there's a whole other tier of documentary storytelling that I don't think we've quite found the market pathways for yet.
Yeah, I think finding the market pathways is really interesting. I was with a colleague from SBS and we were talking about Content London, which is a big international conference that happens in London every November. It's a selling and buying conference. And we're saying in 2023, when we went, there was this panic. What's happening to the industry across scripted and unscripted? And in 2024, they were saying that there was really a sense of people going, okay, the landscape has changed. How are we doing the new deals? And that kind of rigor, how are we doing the new deals? What are the international deals that we can do? How's that working? I think that's the part of the puzzle that people wanted to hear more about at AIDC.
There was a fantastic post from Simon Nash, a documentary filmmaker, who was struck by the contrast between the incredible amount of wonderful films being pitched and then the likelihood that few of them would ever be produced, was his comment.
One of the reasons we want these news pathways is exactly what Simon was saying in his post, is that there are so many great ideas. Like, I've been a commissioner. I can tell you hand on heart that there is not a lack of great ideas in Australia. It's just they're not getting made because there aren't enough pathways, there isn't enough money. And so I really get what he was saying in terms of documentary. So when we're talking about, how do we look at what Channel 4 is doing with YouTube and bring that in, or how do we create new pathways that keep building our audiences? That's really the reason to do it, just so that we can keep those voices coming and keep telling these amazing stories that we've got to tell to each other.
And I heard there weren't a lot of streamers on the ground at AIDC either. It was more traditional platforms that were part of the conversation.
I think Stan and Amazon had representation there, but none of the other streamers. Again, concerning. And when we're talking about quotas, like, why isn't there someone there? What is the interest in telling Australian stories if they don't have representative at a really significant conference like AIDC?
So that's events. What are some of the key industry updates that have been happening?
So we've got the SPA policy platform came out, which is really where SPA is setting their agenda for 2025. It's really focusing on Australian audiences, strengthening our national bodies and things. One of the other really interesting things about SPA is that there is the inaugural chair of SPA, who is Kate Carnell. Now, why does that matter to everyone? It matters to everyone because she has an incredible experience in small business. And I'm a member of SPA, that's my union. And when I was listening to her talk to the union members about us as small businesses, you know what really struck me, Kirsty? We are all small businesses. Like, this isn't just a message for producers. This is a message for crew. Even an actor now, I think, more than ever, is their own small business.
Yeah, absolutely. I have always approached freelancing as entrepreneurship. You need to build your brand. You need to market yourself. You need to find your clients. You need to put yourself out there. We need to take a bit more agency over our careers as freelancers, no matter what part of the industry we're working in. So it's great to see her taking that approach.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that she's talking about is how we make sure government understands that across industry we are small businesses. So a lot of other parts of our economy have really strong advocacy on the behalf of their small businesses and how we can do that better as an industry. So I'm really excited about that.
Me too, on all of those key issues.
Other industry news, Foxtel, we saw Alison and Hurbert-Burns announcing that she was leaving. I mean, the big question with Alison, who's been a great advocate of Australian content, and she's got some incredible shows under her belt, like The 12 and Colin from Accounts. And, everyone's wondering where she's going. So watch this space. I think she's on gardening leave until the end of June. So we'll see an announcement about her in due time. And also we've got Hugh Marks, who's now started as managing director at the ABC. And I believe he sent an internal email talking about what his agenda was for the ABC. And to be honest, as an industry person, it was all the things we want to hear. We're going to support local. We really want to be a network that people want to work with, and that we have a really special pace as a public broadcaster. Did you follow much of Cyclone Alfred and the coverage around Alfred?
Not a lot.
My family's up in Brisbane, and I think AIDC just absolutely showed how brilliant it was at all of those things. But another thing that made me really passionate about public broadcasting around that was how much fake news there was through AI. Like people could generate entire buildings being knocked down in an AI clip and say, this just happened on the Gold Coast. And so, for all of our public broadcasters, but also for 7, 9 and 10, I could see in their news coverage that they were really having to educate people as to what was real and what wasn't. So moving forward, it's just really important that we've got that touchstone, because first they have to go through a really rigorous test in terms of verified information. And secondly, we have a system where they can be held accountable through the Senates. What have you found when you worked at ABC? Like, there is a strong process of accountability in that.
Yeah, I've done a couple of shows with the ABC, and sometimes it's frustrating as a producer because you feel like you're slowing down your creative process in order to meet all of these stringent requirements. But it's important because you are going to get fact checked, and they essentially put the processes in place to ensure that you're meeting obligations. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing as AI continues to develop, but not only AI, but just the pace of storytelling in general and people wanting to know what's happening in the moment. It's that speed of creativity and that speed to market and speed to audience versus accuracy of what you're reporting.
That speed to market is really interesting. Actually, Chris Hocking from Late Night Films sent me a really great clip, which is looking at that speed. It's talking about scripted, actually, but it's talking about the need for speed, essentially, in terms of getting to market, because, our art form is really slow. And some of that is to do with craft excellence and really important. But also when we're increasingly up against a creative economy and where people can turn around things so quickly, so agilely, and at such a cost, it's a really great clip that I recommend everyone watch. I won't give it away, but there's some pretty spectacular examples about changing technologies and speed of things.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it, because my experience now is I do expect in the moment updates. Even the Oscars, I wasn't watching the 3-hour broadcast. I was checking the Instagram feed for who'd won the award and getting frustrated if it felt like there was a delay of even a few minutes of when it probably would have been announced and when that news was getting through to me.
Audiences are shifting. We're an audience business. We've got to be having these conversations. Some other big industry news, of course, is that HBO Max have now come out with their date, 31st of March.
To launch here in Australia?
Yeah, to launch here in Australia. So they've previously been in Latin America, Europe, and obviously in the US, and even in Japan, I think, since 2020. But now they're coming in. It obviously has an impact on BINGE. I think for now you can get HBO Max free if you've got BINGE, but that's a sort of a short-term deal. So they're going to be talking, I think, at Screen Forever about their content strategy for Australia. And everyone's waiting to hear that. Are they going to commission original shows is a really important question that we all want to know the answer to. What do you think is going to happen with HBO? What do you see its impact being on the local market?
It's hard to know. I think the question I always ask is, what does that mean when you have market saturation across so many different streamers and, cost of living? Can anyone really afford to be subscribed to 6 or 8 platforms? So you are seeing a lot of people jumping month to month from subscription to subscription just to get access to the shows they want and then dropping off.
Yeah, market churn is such a big issue for the streamers. Do you know the platform that has the lowest market churn?
No.
It's actually Spotify. And because
Really?
they have built such a clever business model, once you're in Spotify and you start building your lists, if you don't pay your months, you miss all those lists that you've built. Like, that is the reason that they are by far the platform with the lowest churn.
And that tailoring doesn't really happen as much in television. Now that I think about it, you can add things to your watch list, but you're not necessarily going back and rewatching multiple times or listening to your favorite songs over again. Yeah, it's a different model.
Well, we also saw some conversation this month about whether Netflix were going to move into podcasts being broadcast live. because that is a really growing marketplace and it's reasonably low cost. All these different moves that we're seeing in the market, how different people are going to respond. Are they going to make it harder to get out of platforms and back into it? I don't know how to do it the same way that Spotify's doing it, but, watch this space.
Do you listen a lot more to long form podcast or audio content than you do long form television at this point in time?
I am a narrative person. I do love narrative, but I can easily watch a 2-hour podcast of some of my favorite podcasts. And I have to check the numbers, but I think there's been something like, I don't know over what time period, if it was a year or if it was shorter than that, but like an 85% growth in people watching podcasts.
I'm still a listener. I don't like to waste my time by sitting down and watching two talking heads when I can listen to a podcast on the go or in the car. So I am not a convert yet, but maybe in the future.
It might be a survey. We might need to do one of our polls on that.
Yeah.
How do you prefer to listen to your podcast? Because it definitely is a growing trend.
The other piece of news that we saw this month was Seesaw Films being acquired by Mediawan. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, having been at Matchbox Pictures when NBCU came in, I think one of the things that is a great benefit for the producers in there is that when you're putting together a finance plan for a show, up to 30%, getting lower at the moment, but let's say 20 to 30% of your budget is on your distribution advance, which is an international distributor putting money against making your show because they believe that they can sell it for that amount. And we need that money in Australia to make our shows. So when you've got a partner, an owner like Mediawan, what that means is instead of the producer needing to waste all that time going around shopping, trying to get that international piece of the puzzle, they're on board with the project already. They'd be seeing the slate early, and it means that you've got a lot greater chance of getting projects up, particularly in this time where that international money is really hard to get up.
Yeah, and anything that gives you greater security, whether it's a piece of policy, whether it is that secure distribution from your majority shareholder who happens to be global, that all makes a huge difference in being able to, again, have that speed to market and get shows out there.
Now, the big question is there a downside? Because everything has two sides, right? There was an article in The Conversation recently talking about should we be giving as much offset money to internationals? I think they're talking about big American shows, and now we've got a location offset, but also talking about companies that are owned internationally. Is there a world in which we should be prioritizing money that stays in Australia? It's a question worth asking.
I think, again, it's that ecosystem. We do want shows that we're making on a local level to travel internationally, but we also want to make sure that they're really strong Australian voices. And even if you're not pitching on a global level, going out to various distributors, you still are pitching internally, and that global company needs to approve your slate before they're going to give you that distribution advance. So yeah, hopefully it's a fantastic partnership for them, and they're very much on the same page creatively and are going to continue to support local stories. But I think Seesaw has always had a really strong brand behind them, so I don't think that's probably going to change.
So, Kirsty, what's happening in production around the country?
Well, there's a couple of new shows up and running, but I'm actually more interested in talking about what is not in production around the country, because we've just seen, unfortunately, the cancellation of Neighbours for a second time.
Oh my goodness, it's such a tragedy. It's a tragedy on so many levels. The Australian story element, but also the training element. Like, we are tradies. We learn by doing. We get better at our craft over doing. And if we don't have those long run shows to get better on, I mean, where are the training opportunities now, in your opinion?
Yeah, you just need to be on the tools, and that's possible in some ways through the creator economy and going and making your own low budget stuff for YouTube. Anyone can just pick up a camera and go and make something. But it's a completely different story to working as a crew member in this hierarchical production environment where things move so fast and every minute counts in terms of budget and output, and you just have to be able to perform your craft to the highest level as fast as you can. So those training environments are so important, and those long-running shows let new crew come in and turn over and replace each other and step up into new roles. Yeah, it's devastating.
This is part of why I and Dr. Osterhaven put together the freestyle element. It's about us having an ecosystem. Like, we cannot sustain our industry if we've just got the American shows. We can't just have premium. We need also to have this cheaper, like, still aiming for great story quality, but actually that system that we know works. Always amazes me as a producer, and you come on and you hit that first day of shooting And people walk in, and whether they're a grip or a gaffer or whatever their role is, script supervisor, they slot in, and within 24 hours, you've got a machine that is functioning because everyone knows their role. That's part of how this art form works.
Yeah, you're seeing it more and more that people aren't necessarily up to the skill level they need to be, especially with crew shortages.
Yeah, and Screen Australia are doing a whole lot of work in training new people and extending that. But look, there's no two ways around it. Neighbours is a big loss in terms of us training up people in our industry.
What have you been watching this month, Julie?
Oh, two things I watched this month that I really loved is Invisible Boy, Nick Verso's series on Stan, and also How to Make Gravy. I know I'm a little bit late to that on Binge, and it did come out at Christmas time, but what I loved about both those shows, they both had beautiful male perspectives that were vulnerable and interesting. I found both of those pieces really, really moving, and they had really interesting male protagonists in it.
I love that. And I was really, really happy to see Lesbian Space Princess, which is a South Australian animated film. It picked up the Teddy Award for Best Feature Film over in Berlin. So I was able to watch that at Adelaide Film Festival last year, and it was just such a good audience-pleasing film. And I loved that there were different pockets of audience who were laughing at different jokes. So it was clear that there was like the lesbian corner, and then the male corner, and then the general audience corner, and they were all responding to different parts. So it's a really beautiful layered film.
And a really surprising film to come out of Australia and be a success too. Isn't that lovely to see these kind of new genres that we're exploring? One of the companies that I've done a deep dive with are Glitch Productions, and I can't wait to share with people the way that one of their shows has got 400 million views globally in the animation space. Like, Australia's doing extraordinary things in this space, and it's great to celebrate it. Well, Kirsty, I reckon that gets us just about to the end of episode 2 of We Interrupt This Broadcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Anything we've missed, we'll be wrapping up in the show notes, and there'll be some bonus content there in terms of what's happening around the country and what's coming up. We're also going to do a sneaky little bonus episode this month about Screen Forever, which is coming up in May. If you're interested in going to that conference, whether you're a producer or whether you come from another part of the industry, we'll be sharing our tips and what to look forward to as part of that conference. Don't forget to tune in Wednesday night directly after this podcast drops, and we'll be doing some polls and interaction live on our Instagram at We Interrupt Podcast. And you can also subscribe to us at weinterruptthisbroadcast.com.au to get all of the new episodes in your inbox as we launch our deep dive sessions.
Yes, from next week, every Tuesday, a deep dive interview will be coming out. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone.
Now back to your regular programming.
We Interrupt This Broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.
This episode was brought to you by Screen Vixens, Expanding Media and Crew HQ. We Interrupt This Broadcast is hosted by Julie Eckersley and Kirsty Stark and produced and edited by Leonie Marsh.